Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi. Hey Tom, hey Dylan. How were your Mondays so far, Tom and Dylan?
I had the day off because it's a Queen's birthday long weekend here. Everyone that celebrates the Queen's birthday in like every state and every country has it on a different day, and none of them are actually the Queen's birthday. So I think Tom had the Queen's birthday last week, right?
Yeah,
That was quite fun.
fun for the Queen, I guess.
Well, you know, she's been around for a while.
She gets all the cake if she wants.
Mhm.
Pretty quiet, which is good.
Okay, maybe we can give it another minute and then we'll just start because I want to make sure that we get through this. Okay, for efficiency, let's just do it, right? Who's late is late. We'll take notes. So I have a lot of items, so I'll do a lot of talking. I apologize. The first thing for me was I saw the discussion about CI instance variables as the first table to focus on. Are there any objections for just starting with that?
Just one comment from me. So we don't have a strategy to migrate the data yet. I mean, we have ideas, but the table is empty on production. So even if we implement something, we cannot really validate it in a production environment because the table is empty. And if this reaches the self-managed customers and something goes wrong, yeah, it's a bit, I would say, unsafe to start with an empty table.
So I don't know what this CI instance variable thing actually does, quite frankly.
So I can explain that really quickly. So it's
Yes.
This table is going to store variables that you can define on an instance level, and in this way, all the variables declared on the instance level are going to be injected into all the jobs on this instance. So it's like a predefined variable that you can actually define on your instance, and it gets injected into your build, into your job.
Thank you. That is pretty much self-explanatory. So,
yeah. So I guess
I'm glad that it is what I think it is.
Creating something global is not a good idea on GitLab.com.
Yeah, and I think that is a valid concern. For me, like migrating something that is empty on our production database seems like a red flag.
I think like it's not even like migrating, it's like creating elsewhere or like doing that like very easy because like I think this is to some extent like actually very good idea because there's like so many other stuff that we have to fix except data migration, and the next step was we have to figure out migration. So I don't think that this is a good idea.
What we need to create at least one instance variable, so that we knew that it actually works. This could allow us to detect some edge cases of using the table with decomposition.
Like, for example, like we are reading this table anyway today. Like every time that you fetch variables, we are reading the table anyway. So even maybe you don't have the data there, but we are already reading this table.
But having data returned after reading this table, we might need to do something with this data. And I still feel like having at least one variable would provide more feedback than not having any.
So we would create one variable in the instance. Any variable it could be. I don't think that it's really like a big problem.
Like if we add one instance variable on GitLab.com, it makes sense to me.
Let's do that. And I think Dylan has officially coined the variable that shall be created. So the Dylan
Sharding magic variable or something like that.
Shard magic. Okay,
yeah,
so
I think we like, I get the concern about not really testing this or caring about the outcome, but we know that it's going to, even self-managed customers are likely to have a very small number of these variables. Like we wouldn't expect any self-managed customer to have 100,000 of these. It just wouldn't be happening. So any migration we write will likely run safely for them. And given how incredibly simple this feature is, like I have a high degree of confidence that we can verify that it's going to work correctly. And yeah, it's pretty unlikely we'll have a bug in this change.
okay, so I think the decision, if I understand it correctly, is we will create one variable, the GitLab.com testing variable, and we will use the CI instant variables as the first table, right? I mean, there's going to be more. Any other objections? The decision has been made. I should go into auctioning. Cool. Okay, next item. Thank you. I sat down on Friday and I created a sort of high-level epic structure and also a planning issue for 14.1. My thinking was we should treat this as we should treat any other thing that we release, right? And at least specify what we're going to do in the next month. I've created essentially like a bunch of epics and moved a few, but the three main things that I feel we need to focus on are support for many databases, the like CI table decomposition, even though I don't quite know what that means, and the migration tooling that I think was referenced earlier on. There's also observability pieces, and Yorick highlighted that he also has a sort of very large cleanup epic. So where I am right now is, so first I would like to understand if people are generally okay with this structure and if it makes sense, right? Because it just needs to be in a format that, you know, we can work with. And then secondly, I've not actually added any specific issues that we want to start with because I don't know what those issues are, right? So I would like to be in a position where we can say, okay, you know, these are the like 5 things we want to do first for supporting in databases. There's maybe a sub-discussion about load balancing. These are the next things we want to do for the migration tooling. Because the ideal outcome of this for me is that we can assign the 14.1 milestone to them, we can put them on the build board, and then folks can pick them up. I've also, and this is purely tentative, right? Like absolutely subject to change. It's like I've sort of suggested folks who may focus on specific sort of higher level epics, like areas to work with, because I want to make sure that we parallelize as much as possible with an emphasis on as much as possible, right? And I think it makes sense to have at least 2 people focus on these areas. So if somebody goes on vacation, something is still happening and we don't have bottlenecks in terms of knowledge. I'll stop here. Any first, like, this is crazy, or yes, let's continue.
I have the next one. So I feel like just strictly for 14.1, we should do just 3 things. For me, the epics is a bit hard.
Sorry, you broke up. I couldn't understand you.
For me, the epics is a bit hard to reason about because we're not planning to do all of 100% of each epic for 14.1. So I feel like we should do whatever issues that get us to do these 3 things, which is we can create a new DB, we can migrate the DB, and we can use new new DB. So yeah, whatever gets us to that, I think.
Yeah, so I think what would help me is actually identify that work, right? Because I don't know what that is, and if we have captured that in the relevant epics, because I agree with you, that would be great, but I'm not sure where it is.
So I think it's in the first 2 epics mostly.
Okay, can I share my screen quickly? Because then, can you see my screen? Okay. So this is the first one. Using Tong's criteria, which ones of those very many, which also need more context, right? They're just being created, would be relevant for that specific goal. I'll expand this.
So this is I was asking that in the later point, but I feel the first sub epic, the load balancing sub epic,
This one.
that's almost like a stretch goal. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what we really want to do?
Probably like for this current, like the milestone, but like right after, like it's not gonna be stretch goal because like the more CI we move, we actually need load balancing support. Then.
Yeah. But I can collapse and we can essentially say we're not going to touch this for 14.1. That's perfectly acceptable to me. And then in those other like items here, number 1, that's already, I think, Tong, you're working on this. Do we need this for 14.1?
I think so.
Okay. Number 2.
The load balancing support, jumping back to that, do we need, are we going to come talk about that next? Like,
we can talk about that next. I just understood it as something that we don't necessarily need to do right now as the next.
One thing I thought that we might need to do is that we may need service discovery to get this to production for CI instance variables table.
Why service discovery?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this may be something we want to talk about the infrastructure, but maybe they're not going to want us to hard code or implement a new way to connect to the database that isn't handled by the tooling they have in place. And at present, their tooling for configuring the host and the database is through service discovery. So
that's a tricky question, but I think like my perception of that is like we're just gonna probably have like a completely separate fleet of the databases configured similarly, but it's not gonna happen like in this milestone. Truly, like it's too big undertaking.
yeah, well, I guess if our next objective is to run CI instance variables on GitLab.com, I think we just want to implement as many, ship as many things as we can to get to that point. We have like we can define things that we will need before that we can ship, but then there's going to be a bundle of things that need to be shipped together in order to actually deliver on it. And I think I thought we were trying to set out that objective. Otherwise, we can just talk about 14.1 being a bunch of things we know we can ship ahead of time, but won't result in CI instance variables getting to production. But
yes, I'm kind of assuming that we're not gonna be able, like in the 14.1, to run that. Actually, we probably gonna have the development pieces in place to actually like then engage infrastructure team like to create all of these aspects. Because there is like a big infrastructure overhead like to prepare that. But maybe what is like feasible for us is like maybe it's like we will be able to approach, let's say, staging in much easier form. Maybe using the current database, but many logical databases in the current database on staging.
okay, so you're suggesting that the milestone we might want to try to talk about what issues go into that is we have staging connected to multiple logical databases on the same database servers, where CI instance variables are migrated and moved over.
Yes, because like on the production, what we really we need proper database setup. We're not gonna probably add logical databases to the current one. I think like it's kind of no-go and too risky. Second, adding additional configurations to the config, if you would use the same database, gonna basically multiply amount of the connections, because where it's gonna open twice amount of the connections, and like the number of the connections is like a big concern point for us today. So the production, I think, needs to be handled like on the GitLab.com needs to be handled like step by step by provisioning things on the infrastructure side, so the team can actually prepare the proper infrastructure for that. Because I don't think that we can use the current database for adding new logical database.
Yeah, my concern, I don't know, maybe you have a plan for this, but I'm a little bit concerned about how the like database schema looks, the structure, SQL, etc. If we start to say staging actually connects to two different logical databases, and there's two CI instance variable tables in a migration, like I'm a little bit concerned about what a rollout process will look like if we don't actually plan to go to production with what we ship. But maybe that's something that's solvable.
Can you ask the question again?
Well, at some point we merge code such that we have two structure.sql files that describe a new schema for CI instance variables. Once that code is merged, it will make its way to production. And I don't know how to wrap that in a feature flag neatly or other things. So I feel like if we just aim to get both of them, get it to production with as a first step, we wouldn't have to solve this extra problem of like feature flag wrapping schema changes, which we don't do.
It's actually, there is like the issue open by Tonk, how to handle managed schemas. And Rails.6.1 actually has this very handy feature that allows you to, for different database connections, define different schemas effectively. And we can actually start with the separate migration folder for this logical database. So unless you configure your database YML with this additional migration folder, it will not actually be executed on the production because it's going to be a separate migration. And what we can really focus on is ensuring that this schema is working in the CI, it's working in a development environment, it's being used. And then like you kind of avoid the problem with this model that you have like a uniform folder to handling different logical databases, because each logical database has its own migration folder. So, and it has own structured SQL, which has different name. So you don't really have the problem that you're gonna run CI instance variable in the new logical database on GitLab.com, because you will not run that until you actually have the database YML configured.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the second thing is like in the, let's say, our presume CI application record, you define connects to, and you can configure many connections. And Rise basically gonna fall back to the default one. I think this is the one, the name legacy connection handler, connection handling, or something like that. If this connection name is not configured in the database YML. So this is how we can actually model also with the feature flag, because you can make this decision about best connection to use dynamically based on the feature flag, what connection, like what database to use. So actually there is like the pretty good way to ensure that we ship changes for the development, we slowly roll out that on staging, but it has it doesn't have any effects on the production yet.
Thank you for that explanation. So with that in mind, is it fair that I can close the load balancing now? We can say like we don't need to address that in 14.1, the items in the generalized load balancing one.
Why closing?
No, not close, like collapse. Like there's nothing in here in these issues that we need to schedule for 14.1.
Okay, but like I think it's rather just setting milestone, or not?
Yes, but sorry, I was unclear. Any of these issues here, do they need the milestone for 14.1?
I don't think so. I agree with the thing that it's not really yet required. It's gonna be required like in the 14.2, I believe.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Then let's ignore that. That was all I wanted. I'm not going to close anything. It would be nice, but okay. So from what I understood from the discussion, handling multiple schemas is something that needs to happen in 14.1. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Yes.
Okay, I'll open them as tab and then I'll assign them as milestones. The milestone. Many databases can be configured in Omnibus. Is that something that needs to happen?
If we want to run that on the staging, we need Omnibus and CNG. Is
So
it like, I'm kind of thinking this is kind of like a stretch goal, but we're not gonna run unless we have it possible to configure.
So these two here as well.
Yes.
And
connection.
So basically, like I think we are also missing like a additional issue, which is like many databases are used by the GDK, GCK effectively as well for development. And probably this is really like the first step for us for like configuring.
Okay. Okay. This one here is being worked on by Yutong, so I'll just put it at the top. Yep. The connection pool sizing.
It's gonna be required for staging because of the threading model. But I think like we can probably live with this limitation on the single table and probably do it like in the 14.2, but it's gonna quickly become a problem on transitioning. Okay.
CNG provisions additional configured databases. Does that need to happen?
Yes, I think this should be moved to another epic about like the on-premise installation.
Mm-hmm. And this one here as well.
Because it's about like making our customers to use like many databases and provisioning them. And probably this should be handled by the distribution team in the end.
This one here as well, the Omnibus provision additional databases.
Yes.
Okay. Update all migration helpers to support
staging without those two things. Can they be moved out then? And like you've got support for configuring it in Omnibus and Cloud Native GitLab. Our pipelines where we run our deployments will maybe create that extra logical database. Can we get to staging without those two things?
Which one? Sorry.
The two issues that go in the epic that you said about self-managed customers provisioning additional databases.
Yes, but what was the question?
Can we get to staging without those two things? As in, can we move those out of 14.1 and even
Yes.
after some other things? Because
we only need to be able to configure. So like Omnibus CNG needs to create database YML. We don't really need to them to manage databases yet, which is I think like the different objective, which is like one described by that.
Okay. Discover and gracefully handle failures from many databases.
Yes, we have number of like things like recovery flags and other stuff. I don't know yet how to handle that. I think like we're gonna know more as soon as we actually enable more databases, but I have no idea yet.
Okay, maybe we can leave it. Backup and restore tasks sounds like something for later.
Yeah, later.
Define behavior for 2PC transaction pattern.
I think it's not yet problem for with the single table because like we are not creating a lot of data on it. So probably 14.2.
And then connection pools of all configured databases are properly sized.
I think you moved that at the bottom. We discussed it.
Database partitioning works on many databases. Doesn't look like we need it.
It's not yet a concern for us because yeah.
Okay, so essentially anything up to here, right?
No,
Did we talk about the migration helpers?
We didn't need the two above that, but yeah, in 14.1.
So yeah, so Fabian, I think like the CNG provisions and Omnibus provisions, I think it's not what we need now. So we just that outside, but we need like can be configured, right?
Let me quickly. Do we need the discover and handle failures? We were unsure, right?
I think we need migration helpers to support many databases. Okay. It may be as simple as it just works, or it may be different. But right now we often use active record-based connection, which is the problem.
In 1 second, I'll just do.
I think we could probably skip that one if we're not going to use the migration helpers to create the CI instance variables table on the new database. We could probably defer that as well, a couple of steps, because we could get to production without those migration helpers.
I think you are right. Like the problem with migration helpers is like that database migrate when you configure additional database, it's gonna be executed exactly in this context, the proper context. The problem is really like with the background migration, because background migration doesn't provide it doesn't have the context today.
It's wrong.
Yes, Fabian, let me correct that. Let's move on.
Okay, that's fine. But other than these two, which I messed up, I think essentially these 5 here at the top are what we need. Like GDK, GCK support, many databases can be configured, handle multiple schemas, CNG configuration, provisioning is wrong, this is wrong, and this can be done later. And the rest is for later. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so this is this one. We're a little bit late, I'm sorry, but I think it's important. The CI table decomposition. I'm honestly a little bit confused as to what we need to do here for the goal that we outlined. If anything, we've identified the first CI sharding table. I'll just close that later. This one here is the verify work, right? So we can ignore that. is this something that we even need to care about in 14.1?
I would create an issue clearly stating create CI instance variables on additional database, and this is our goal.
Mm-hmm.
And we only have this one planned because identify first CI table to shard using the composition. I think like we didn't have, we actually closed that already, right? And
Yes.
the outcome of that issue is exactly the one that you're creating right now. And this is what we are doing. This is what we are focusing on.
Cool. That sounds good. And then for the migration tooling, we don't have very many issues, but we have one that I think is already, I think the idea here was that we know we need it. We know it's going to take us a while to get it right. So we should start now, even though we're not going to ship necessarily anything in 14.1. But that's up for discussion.
I have the question for 1000 points. How are we gonna migrate CI instance variables, even if there is one record?
I have a comment in that first issue with 2 ideas. So I think we can, if we have the necessary permissions, we can use something similar what Dylan researched. The good thing here is that we can easily set up replication on the whole table, so we don't need to do manual filtering. So the high-level process is basically we need to create the database table on the other database server, kick off the data sync or replication, figure out a point when the data is actually in sync, do some sort of locking to replace the connection. So the old model, so the model connects to the new database at some point. We need some sort of force reconnect or some sort of event that make this happen. Yeah, so there are 2 ideas. The second one is the replication idea. The first one based on triggers to store the record changes. I think the replication one is much simpler. So using standard Postgres replication, logical replication to keep the data up to date.
Okay. Yes, please.
Given that the write to this table is incredibly low, is there like an easier third option where we just, well, I mean, the risky option is like run a migration and cut them over without any locking or preventing of anybody writing. Or entirely application side, we just don't allow writes, and we 500 if somebody tried to create an instance variable during a period of time which we're actually just copying it from one place to another. Like they're 2 separate Rails models, and we're just literally, something is going to loop over the first table and write to the second table while that thing is running. If anybody tried to create one, we just fail it. I don't know how exactly we implement that, but that could be implemented as just like there's only one code path that you can go through where you can create a CI instance variable, and that code path will be wrapped with a check Redis for this migration currently running. So like entirely application code, no low-level Postgres concepts here, because we won't be actually migrating much data. And we won't need to worry about syncing them. We could read from both tables concurrently too if we wanted a period of time where they both worked.
I'm like, okay, I'm gonna comment on that, but I have like a few remarks to consider. Like, this is like a single table out of like 50 more tables, like, and I'm kind of wondering, like, if we start writing to this table now, will it actually make it harder for us later to migrate or other data? And second question, like, how we can actually have a model where we can like reset migration and like remigrate because we find something not working properly. So is it mean like we are not maybe performing writes now, or maybe we do concurrent writes to databases, or we do something different? But I think like my perception is like we need somehow something with the migration that we can reset migration and start everything from scratch, because we find that we need to do it at some point. Because right now we start with a single table, it's very simple, but the more tables we move, some things may pop up to be like not the best, like not the most optimal. So
I think this is also a good enough reason to do what Dylan suggests, because it might be quite tricky to achieve the same with low-level PostgreSQL features like replication. And by using high-level Ruby, it might be easier to model such behavior. Yeah, so.
I was going to say that I don't think whatever we implement now will even be applicable to what we implement for the next. And like you said, okay, we're doing one table and then we're going to start doing more tables. I think we should stop thinking about that, because my assumption is we're going to do one table and then we're going to do the rest. Like, I don't know if we're going to find the second table. I don't think we're going to do 1, 2, 3 all the way to 50.
No,
I think
no.
we know.
I kind of think that it's gonna exactly be like that. There is this one table like to have many databases. The next step gonna be all other tables.
Yeah, so whatever we write for migration now, we should just do the dirtiest way we can, because we just won't reuse it. That's my assumption. And if we wanted to do something at scale, we won't be able to test it either now. So like we'll constantly be debating while reviewing the code, is this going to scale? Is this not? It's like, let's not even worry about it. Nobody's writing.
So I don't disagree, but I have one comment. I think maybe both things need to happen a little bit in parallel, right? Because we know that the next step is going to be do everything, right? At which point we need to care about all of those things, right? And if we wait until we are done with our first iteration to kick that off, I'm worried that it'll just take a long time, right? So maybe there is a path here where,
that's a meta point where we were trying to like get away from that before, but like I agree we do need to put things in parallel, but we need like this meta communication technique where we can say, like, while reviewing code, while we're writing code, there is code that's going to get us to CI instance variables, and there are discussions and issues related to that, and then there is parallel work that's going to get us to the rest, and that we don't conflate those two things when we're doing work and we're reviewing code and we're having technical discussions.
Is there a good reason why we can't use background migrations?
Consistency. We kind of want to like do all of that without a downtime.
Yeah, for the rest, for the big, huge 5 terabytes worth of data, I don't think we can do that.
So like, I think my perception, like we should use whatever like Postgres offer us. So either it's physical replication or it's logical replication. Logical replication is more flexible. So I mean, ideally, if this would be like our handwritten tool, I would prefer this to live outside of our GitLab Race application. that's my concern, because like I know that if we get to some point of logical replication, it's very likely that we're gonna run this replication 5 times until we are fully confident that all of data is properly migrated and it's consistent. So I don't trust background migration to provide consistency on updating data between 2 databases, unless we kind of get to the using database triggers.
I agree with that, but I doubt that PostgreSQL replication is flexible enough to help us achieve our goals.
Logical replication is actually easy. That's the part.
Just to make sure we move forward, Adam, what is your opinion on this? Because you've written down these ideas before.
Yeah, so back to Dylan's idea to do the really simple migration as the first step. I think that's a good idea. to start with that, because it's quite simple what we need to do. We need to plug data from the old database and then just insert it into the new one, and then make some sort of magic to switch the model. I don't know how we do that yet, to point to the new connection. But implementing these more complex migration steps that either using replication or using a trigger-based solution will definitely require us much more time and thinking. And I don't think it will fit into one milestone.
But I think that's okay, right? I think we are all okay with that. We know that that won't happen. But I personally like that idea. So I think the decision maybe here is we can either create another issue and say like migrate CI instant variables, right, and do it in a scrappy way, right, and then focus on sort of the longer term, how to do it right when we have to move all of our data, right, and maybe break that down a little bit more. But it also feels like we haven't really settled on the path, right? Then maybe more discussion needed that we can have async. Is that fair?
Let me do it, let's say that differently. Can we just not care about migrating 0 rows? Since we're gonna anyway run
something that
the
works
staging
for ourselves
and production, so can we just not migrate 0 rows and like switch to another connection and just create in the new database instead of spend this time of like figuring out logical replication?
Yeah, we will possibly, if we never want to ship the CI instance variables to self-managed customers, if we never want to do that, then we don't have to write this first migration because we don't have any second database.
I would focus on logical replication with the focus on like CI instance variables with the intent that we migrate all the rest data. But I would not focus on the migrating CI instance variables different way. Because we don't need to. There is 0 rows. We can create new rows.
I like that idea.
I just kind of don't want to needlessly conflate. Like we're trying to do the simplest thing with one table and like want to get a bunch of issues now that say that's what do we need to do to get that one table done. And if we're talking about replication for the rest of the tables, I think it's better to just think about it in that way. Like if that's the objective of the engineer working on this task to move 5 terabytes worth of data, they need to come up with a solution that moves 5 terabytes worth of data. We can't like give an engineer like a mixed objective of something that would maybe work for a lot of data, but like make it work for 1 row now. Like it just seems confusing as an objective.
So I think like we should right now start concurrently thinking about like migration, but really like on the migration that we need to run in the end.
Okay, so my suggestion here is we had in the beginning a discussion on like let's create at least one variable because then we can do like a scrappy way of migrating. I think the discussion seems to have turned where we are essentially saying let's not care about it because we don't have to. Let's care about the like it's more efficient to care about the longer term objective here, which is 5 terabytes of data, right? And you know this specific work item here will focus on that rather than artificially having to create code and worrying about things that aren't there. And I agree that that is maybe more straightforward. If people are happy with that, we can talk about it like this. And then we also have a little bit more time to figure out how to do it because I think that's going to be a hard thing to do.
If you can have the best of both worlds, you can create the instance variables after we're migrated, switch connection, test it out.
Yeah, I'm not. Cool. Everybody happy with that? Good. Okay. Last thing to discuss is this like observability for multiple databases. I know that Dylan has one item working on this right now. I know that we need better monitoring and observability, but I wasn't sure if that is something that we need like this release.
We can, no, it definitely isn't. We can defer. I mean, I was working on that because it was just something that I saw was easy for me to actually do concurrently with everything else. I knew we had to do it before we get to the final objective of running this on GitLab.com anyway. So
fine, then I will actually drop it because that may make it more focused from this release. Okay, so I think we're kind of at the end. In my mind, what we're trying to accomplish in 14.1 is we're going to try and have staging connect to many databases with CI variables migrated. It doesn't have any data, so essentially, like Tom said, it's connection switching. That's the one major thing. The second thing, which is a longer term objective, which will not ship in 14.1, is to start figuring out the migration tooling for the rest of the tables, which is 5 terabytes of data, right? So we probably need to like break that down a little bit more. I think Adam has ideas. Yannis is not here. He probably has ideas. So I imagine a few items spin out of that. But that's kind of how I see it. And I've assigned the items to the milestone to kick that off. Is that sort of the state of affair?
Are you suggesting we work on the decomposition create migration tooling in from now? Like if you look at all those names, does this imply that only 3 people will work on priority 1 and we're actually going to work on that? The reason I'm asking is like, are we in agreement we want to start working concurrently while there are open issues, start working on something we won't ship in 14.1?
So my understanding, and this may be wrong, is that if we wait starting to work on the migration tooling, right? Just in terms of like how long it will take to actually complete this, right? And we wait a month, right? Then we may end up in a space where we don't have as much time as we want. So we can do this concurrently. But that is an assumption that I'm making because I've heard that it is very complex. If that is not true, you don't have to do that, right? But I thought that in terms of team capacity, if we have essentially like 3 folks working on P1 and then like another 3 folks work on this or start work on that, that would be a good way of sort of having something shippable in the first iteration while already starting to like make headway in this other track. That was my thinking, but that really depends on the, you know, the type of the work.
My perception is like we should start migration tooling as early because there is like 2 reasons. Like we don't need to move all tables to test migration tooling. What we really need is like we need to have a confidence in the migration tooling that it does right thing, and like 6 months is not really like long to have the confidence that this crucial part of the system works properly. So I would expect that like with the migration tooling in like 2 milestones from now, we just start testing migration, even when the rest of the development changes are not yet ready, because we are working on them. But we actually need to run that on the GitLab.com, and this needs to go through staging first, needs to go through like a number of validations, and this is really like essential for us being able like to use CI in another database. So this is kind of like strong requirement that is infrastructure heavy, that is a little bit outside of our control as well to execute. So that's why we need to start to do it early.
That is everybody of the same opinion. Okay.
Yep. Makes sense.
And I'm really thinking that like our migration tooling will probably perform migrating of the CI data like 4 or 5 times till we actually switch over to this data. This would be like my expected way of validating that.
So I think essentially what this breaks down is ship CI instant variables to staging with multiple databases. That's the migration.
I'm still gonna say like getting this actually running on staging is pretty stretch. I think it's fully expected that we get this on development environment, because on staging it still requires SRE involvement, and I'm not confident that we have people to help out us with that at the end. So I think the goal is still like to get this initially on staging because it's like the first environment that we are using.
I think we can try to be ambitious, right? And then start on the migration tooling. and we have all of the issues assigned. I'll move them onto the build board. A quick question is, I've put down folks here like Tong and Yorick, who's not here, and and this one here, I think we only need to do one thing, right? That's very simple. But in terms of like who wants to work on what, I assumed that the migration tooling would be interesting for Adam, because that seems to be your area of expertise and interest. And so it is for Yanis, who has other priorities as well. But I made an assumption here, Dylan, that this is something that you would be interested in as well, but I may be completely wrong, right? I just wanted to make sure that people are sort of comfortable with these sort of focus areas. And that doesn't mean like never talk to each other again. It just means like people having sort of a primary thing to think about. But this is really just, I sat down on Friday and put a few names down, right? So I wanted to validate that this is not completely crazy.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm fine to work on that. My biggest concern is just kind of being a team player. There's other tasks there that are a higher priority, and possibly some of them might be a bit of a grind to work on. And I don't want to be working on too often high level tasks like this without occasionally being a team player and working on some of the other tasks. But I'm from my perspective, I'm fine working on that.
Well, then I think it becomes a question from Tong as well. Like I don't know where the grind is here, right? But I don't want people to feel they get committed to doing just the things that are hard and nasty.
They're all hard, so.
Oh.
I think this is fine. I have a feeling that, yeah, as you say, it'd be nice to kind of be aware of what other things are doing. So
yeah,
definitely, like we
should talk about this
issues
frequently.
just in that epic. Yeah, we should definitely work on other issues.
No, and I think in general, right, what will happen is I'll put things into ready for development, which are the things that I assign for the milestone, right? And in terms of how to work, if you have nothing to do right now because of review cycles or whatever it is, right, you should feel empowered to just pick up the next thing and start contributing, right? You shouldn't say like, this is not in the epic that I'm supposed to generally have an eye on, right, and never look at other things. I think that's not what I'm suggesting. It's just to like make sure that people don't step onto each other's toes too much. That's it. I would offer, like I'll rewrite this, and I would offer to do like a 5-minute sort of kickoff video for 14.1, just summarizing that for the various stakeholders who will follow this with interest. Are people okay with that? Good. Also means I don't need to attend a late meeting. So
thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks again for the time. Like I apologize that it wasn't broken down as much beforehand, but I think we're going to get into the groove of doing this, right? And it becomes a little bit less work every time we do it. Any other open questions? Any concerns? Cool. Thanks for joining. Sorry for being a little bit over time. Hopefully we'll be on time next Wednesday, or if we have nothing to talk about, we can maybe also cancel it. Let's see. Thank you, Dylan, for joining us on the Queen's birthday. And that's it, I suppose.
I wish everyone good luck, including myself.
Yeah, like I have to admit, the way you make it sound, right? I'm a little bit relieved that I don't have to implement any of this myself. No, you're going to do great. Like I think I'm actually really excited about this. I think it's going to be a really challenging thing to do, but on the other hand, I think we have probably one of the more challenging phases of this project just behind us, which is to make a decision on what we want to do. So I'm optimistic. Cool. Goodbye.